Welcome to The Explainer. Now look, you guys are denim professionals. You know the fits, the fabrics, the washes. You live and breathe this stuff every single day. But right now, we're going to trace the literal threads of your industry all the way back to their absolute beginning. We are uncovering the massive global supply chain that had to be built from the ground up before the very first pair of riveted waist overalls could ever even exist. Let's dive in.
So when we talk about the first blue jean, I know exactly where your minds go. Boom, 1873, California, Levi Strauss. And hey, you're not wrong, right? That is absolutely the birth of the physical garment we know today. But to truly master the history of this business, we've got to look way past those rivets. We need to ask, where did the materials, the whole sprawling system that made that pair of jeans possible, actually come from? Because let's be real, the blue jean didn't just magically pop out of thin air in the American West. It was the culmination of a global supply chain that took literal centuries to build.
To find those true roots, we actually have to rewind centuries. Way before industrial denim was even a glimmer in anyone's eye, India was the undisputed heavyweight champion of cotton. For hundreds of years, they were this incredible, bustling hub for spinners and weavers. They were producing these highly sought-after fabrics and trading them on a massive scale. We're talking across Asia, the Middle East, Africa, and eventually all the way into Europe. They basically drew up the original blueprint for a globally traded cotton product.
And this set up a really fascinating historical dynamic. Basically, European demand for those gorgeous, handcrafted Indian textiles went through the roof. It became insatiable. So naturally, manufacturers over in Britain wanted a piece of that action. But they quickly realized there was no way they could compete by hand. Their solution? Rapid mechanization. Manufacturing hubs like Lancashire and Manchester just absolutely exploded. But here's the catch. To feed those massive new machines, British mills needed immense, unprecedented quantities of raw imported cotton fiber. So suddenly you've got these two distinct international trades happening at once. Raw fiber moving from the growers to the mills, and finished yarn or cloth moving from those mills out to the consumers.
And you can see exactly how fast this played out across the Atlantic. In 1790, Samuel Slater helps establish a permanent mechanized cotton spinning mill in Rhode Island. Boom. Then, by 1810, the Ameskia Manufacturing Company is founded. And hey, as denim experts, tuck that name in your back pocket. Ameskia is going to be huge later. Fast forward to the 1850s, mechanical sewing comes along and totally revolutionizes the speed of making ready-made seams, laying the exact runway for 1873 and those first riveted jeans. We're talking a massive leap from early isolated spinning mills all the way to industrial systems capable of pumping out highly durable clothing in record time.
But, as you know, all those shiny new machines are completely useless without raw materials. And during the first half of the 19th century, the United States stepped up to become the ultimate raw material engine. Cotton cultivation just aggressively expanded across the American South. The scale here is staggering, sweeping across states like Mississippi, Alabama, Louisiana, and just constantly pushing west. All these raw cotton bales were moving by river, road, and rail to major ports. Vast quantities were shipped across the Atlantic to feed the British mills, while a ton of it traveled north to fuel America's own booming textile centers up in New England.
Now, it is absolutely essential that we look directly at how this massive expansion was actually powered. As the New Hampshire Historical Society states very plainly, cotton grown in the South and harvested by enslaved people supplied the New England textile industry. The intense global demand for raw cotton was fundamentally tied to slavery. It directly drove the forced movement of enslaved people into those expanding western regions. That is simply the direct factual link right at the very base of this historical supply chain.
And this created an incredibly intense regional divide. Think about it. You had two drastically different worlds that were locked into total, unavoidable economic dependence on one another. Down south, you have an entire economy completely reliant on plantation agriculture. Then, on the exact opposite side, up in New England, you have a society defined by these booming mechanized factory hubs. The exact same crop-supported agriculture in one region, shipping and finance in the port cities, and heavily mechanized factory production thousands of miles away. Bottom line, those northern mills literally could not run without southern cotton.
Zooming in on those New England factory hubs for a second, the evolution is just amazing. Places like Lowell, Massachusetts basically wrote the blueprint for the modern factory. They were integrating massive, water-powered spinning and weaving machines all under one single roof. And to run these sprawling operations, they heavily recruited young female workers from the surrounding farms. This right here was the absolute birth of the American industrial textile system, pulling together raw materials, cutting-edge tech, and a highly dedicated workforce.
But hey,
As anyone who works in supply chain today knows, massive systems always have massive vulnerabilities. And from 1861 to 1865, the American Civil War violently exposed them. This deeply interconnected system was just shattered. Southern cotton became incredibly scarce almost overnight, and Union blockades completely slashed exports coming out of Confederate ports. It really proved just how dangerously reliant those geographically distant manufacturing hubs were on a continuous, uninterrupted flow of raw materials.
So what happens when supply chains break? Industries have to adapt to survive, right? And the adaptation here was drastic. Northern mills, like that massive Amoskeag facility we talked about, experienced such severe cotton shortages that they actually had to retool. They started manufacturing weapons and metal goods literally just to keep the lights on. Meanwhile, post-1865, slavery ends and the South transitions into new labor arrangements, things like sharecropping and tenant farming. The labor system completely transformed, but that core geographic split, growing in the South, manufacturing in the North, remained completely intact.
Which brings us to a really crucial, almost magic number for your industry: 9. Just 8 years after the war ended, Levi Strauss & Company needed some seriously durable fabric for their new riveted waist overalls. Their exact specification? 9-ounce industrial denim. And its origin? It was supplied directly by that very same Amoskeag mill up in New Hampshire. This northern industrial powerhouse had evolved to the point where it was now shipping standardized, large-scale denim clear across the continent.
So let's actually map out the physical journey of that famous 1873 jean. First up, the raw cotton is harvested in the major producing regions of the American South. Next, it travels all the way up the coast to New Hampshire, where it's spun and woven into that iconic 9-ounce denim at the Amoskeag mills. And finally, that finished cloth is shipped across the entire country to San Francisco, where it's cut, sewn, and riveted. So even this very early garment depended entirely on a sprawling system stretching thousands of miles.
Which brings us to a final thought for all of you who are out there shaping the future of this industry today. Think about it. If the very first pair of blue jeans back in 1873 required this massive, continent-spanning supply chain tied to global economics and major industrial revolutions, how far have the components of your modern jeans traveled today? Seriously, from the seed to the dye to the weave to the factory floor, you are part of a global thread that has been spinning for centuries. Thanks for joining this explainer. I really hope this completely changes how you look at the very next pair of jeans you design.